Hi, welcome to episode 1 of Every Quilt a Story. Today I'd like to share the story of one of my quilts called Heddles. And in a little while I'll tell you what a heddle is and why I'm making a quilt from it. But basically it's a celebration of all the wonderful materials and tools and equipment that we have available to us today to make quilts. I began spinning and weaving in an effort to try to understand what our foremothers went through in order to have fabric to make quilts from. And this quilt is the first in a series, still being designed, certainly still being made, that is both a celebration of what we have now, but also a recognition of what our foremothers had to do, what they had to go through in order to provide fabric for others, but also for themselves if they were making quilts. So you'll see more of these quilts in future stories. But today, let's talk about heddles. Before we take a look at the quilt itself, I want to explain just a little bit about what a heddle is and why I made the quilt and why I made it the way that I did. This is a heddle from my Shocked Baby Wolf loom, and in this case it's just a thin bar of metal that has 3 slots in it, one on either end and then one in the center. The one in the center, it's like the eye of a needle, so a warp thread a single warp thread goes through here. And this heddle then will control whether that warp thread is in the raised position or the lowered position. So if you think about weaving, and we think of it as over, under, whether you're doing a lattice on a pie crust or doing a simple woven piece, it's over, under. And the heddles are what determine whether the thread's going to go over or under this particular warp thread. So these 2 end slots go onto a frame, which I'll show you in a minute, and that is the thing that is raised and lowered, and so the heddle moves along with it. There can be hundreds and hundreds of these heddles depending on how wide the fabric is that you're making. And I'm going to be talking just about plain weave, which is every other thread. So you're going over one, under one, over one, under one, over one. There are more complex patterns than that, but plain weave is basically what's used for the fabrics that we use in quilting or clothing or lots of things. There are also twills and other things that you can weave. All right, so that's basically the heddle. In olden times, and some weavers now use heddles that are made of string and have knots and loops in them. My looms all have these metal ones. All right, so I mentioned that there are 2 slots on the end that are attached to a frame, and this is what a typical frame might look like. This is, again, from my Shocked Baby Wolf. I'm going to leave this paper here so you can hopefully see better. And these are all heddles. I don't have this isn't attached to my frame, so I don't have any warp threads through it, but I've got lots of heddles here. And I actually, on this particular loom, I have 4 of these frames or shafts. The loom will actually take 8, so you could do complicated patterns, but I only have 4 for mine. So here are where they're attached to the frame, the heddles, and then the eyes for the warp threads are through here. So in a plain weave, I would use 2 frames, for example, and the first frame would have a warp thread through this first heddle. The next frame back would have also heddles, and its first heddle would have the next warp thread through it. This frame would have its next heddle with the next warp thread through it, and so on. So it just alternates. Warp thread through frame 1, warp thread through frame 2, etc., etc. Then this is what goes up and down to either raise or lower those threads. And we're going to go to one of the looms and see exactly how that works and how the weaving works. I'll see you at the loom. All right, we're at one of my looms now. I just wanted to show you the heddle and a little bit how it works so you understand what I was showing in the quilt. This is a heddle. It's that metal rod, and it has an eye that has one of the warp threads through it. My warp is pretty loose right now, but there's the warp thread going through it. And this is attached to one of the shafts. This is a 2-shaft loom, so it's attached to that one. The next heddle will be attached to this one. This is just a plain weave setup, so every other thread goes up, every other thread goes down. And then these shafts go up and down. They're attached to petals that I use when I'm weaving. So to show you what it's going to do, how it opens and closes, I think I'll go to another part, move it around the loom a little bit, will show you better. All right, so this is on the other side of the loom, and here are my warp threads. Again, they're pretty loose. When I lift up one shaft, it opens up what's called a shed. So half of the threads go up, half of the threads go down. Then I can put that shaft down, bring up the other one, and now the opposite sets of threads are going up and the other one down. So it just alternates up and down, up and down, up and down in this plain weave. You can do lots of different tie-ups and configurations to change. You could make a different kind of weave. Plain weave is very common, but also twill, basket weaves, all kinds of things you can do depending on how you arrange these heddles and how you put the warp threads through them. This is also, I just do plain weave on here because it's a 2-shaft. I also have a 4-shaft loom, which means you can do more complicated patterns. There are also 8-shaft looms where you can do even more complicated still. So that's the whole heddle thing that you're going to be seeing in the quilt. All right, I've cleared the decks here in my studio space, my art studio space, to show you the quilt in person. You'll also see a photo on the screen so you can see what it looks like as a whole. These are, I have 5 of these heddles. Actually, it's just the eye of the heddle here, and then these are the warp threads. There are 5 of them, and they're all in different colors. There's an orange, green, yellow, teal blue, and a purple. And that's because this quilt really is intended to be a celebration of the beautiful materials that we have available to us today, the gorgeous colors, good, stable, bright colors, or really rich, deep colors that are all pretty stable, and wonderful fibers, easily obtained, which is, different from the olden days. So, and I also did 5 because when you're designing, odd numbers are more pleasing than even numbers for some reason. Our human eye likes that better. Here I have done just the eye of the heddle rather than the whole heddle, because the whole heddle would actually run right along or behind this. So it's as if the thread is hiding the rest of the heddle piece that you saw. A couple of things that I figured out, and I'm pleased and amazed now that I did. I don't know if I'd have thought about it again at the time. But here I have, this is the eye of the heddle again, so the warp thread, this warp thread is coming through, and as it's going through this eye, it's coming in front of the bottom of that eye of the heddle, and then it's going behind the top. So it gives it a little more of that perspective and dimension to it. And I have these alternated, so one heddle is here, the next one is down, this one is up. So it's as if the shafts on the loom have every other one lifted up as it's doing the weaving. The quilting on this took me a long time to figure out. I was going to do 1/4 of an inch. My machine at the time, it's newly computerized, but at the time it was hand-guided, and it has a channel lock, so I could do straight lines fine, but I was afraid that if I tried to do the 1/4 inch exactly, that I might miss it by a bit, and it would be obvious if it was just a little bit off. So I opted to just be kind of funky and modern and do it still in straight lines, but unevenly spaced. And that way, if it's a little off, nobody knows, and it looks like that's just the way that I planned it. The other thing that I had, the other problem that I had was, am I going to go through the heddle? So this is white thread here, and was I going to go across these heddles with the lines, and then what was I going to do with these? I opted to just do the straight lines because I thought that was just a good modern look for it. And I struggled. I tried so many things with these because it was frankly not going to be a really great time. Wasn't going to be a happy thing to run my machine up here and then have to either break a thread, which I probably wouldn't do, or cross here and go back down again. And I tried that and I did not like it at all. I didn't like the looks of it. It didn't help this to stand out. And really these warp threads, the beautiful colors and textures, is what I really wanted to stand out on the quilt. So I tried all kinds of things. I tried doing it on my domestic machine using a shinier kind of thread, and that didn't work. And I finally I also do some crazy quilting and embroidery, so I had all kinds of pearl cottons. And this is, I think, a size 5 pearl cotton. And I just did a big stitch on it. So here's the big stitch. And I like that because it gave it that texture, and it also gave it a little more dimension to this thread, so it was more like it had the plies of the fibers running through it. I also used tiger tape. I don't know if you've seen tiger tape, but it's just a 1/4 inch. I used 1/4 inch wide tape that you can just lay down, say, against here, so you get a straight line, and then it has lines at even divisions. And I'm not sure which one I used here, maybe 1/2 inch apart. And then I used that to space these stitches evenly and in a straight line. And I really liked that, and I actually enjoyed doing it, which was not going to be the case with some of the other methods that I used. The other thing I want to point out on this quilt is the binding. And here at where the heddles cross the edge of the heddles, where the thread crosses the edge of the quilt, I had the binding match that so that it continued right off the edge, and the binding does not cut off that thread. So the warp thread is really continuous. It's wrapping around a beam in the back over and over and over, rolling around it. So I didn't want to have that binding cut it off. But I didn't want the binding to be emphasized too much either. So I just did the white that's the same as the background. So I really wanted the focus to be on these colored threads. So that's Heddles. It was really the start of a series that I'll show you more quilts for, and then talk a little bit about other things I have in the works. The series is by no means finished, and this was just a wonderful start to it and gave me the idea to continue with the rest of the series, so you'll be seeing more of those. Thanks for joining me for Every Quilt a Story, and I'll see you next time. This is Karen, the Warped Spinster.